They trusted her to comfort their sick, to pray with their dying, until one quiet accusation stripped it all away. But what he didn't know was her mic was still on. In a world that rewards whispers over truth, what happens when dignity refuses to stay silent? Stay with us and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? They said the church was built on faith, but for Grace Mitchell, it had always felt like the last place her soul could breathe. It was the same building where her mother once served tea after every sermon, never missing a Sunday, even when cancer dimmed her steps. Now, years later, Grace carried the same weight with quiet dignity, sleeves rolled, hands ready, eyes soft. The kind of woman who checked blood pressure between hymns and brought soup before you even asked. In this town, reputations weren't built, they were inherited. Grace, at 34, had worked at the local hospital for a decade and volunteered at the church clinic just as long. She was trusted by the sick, the widowed, and the weary. But when the new elder arrived, something in the air shifted. Elder Franklin Holt didn't storm in. He floated, soft-voiced, always smiling, with a way of making you feel examined without ever breaking eye contact. He preached kindness while questioning procedure. "How are the supplies managed?" he asked her one Sunday, as if passing by. "Only you have the keys, right?" The questions were veiled, but the chill beneath them wasn't. Grace had felt this tone before. Not loud, not crude, just sharp enough to draw blood without leaving a mark. She tried not to take it personally. Everyone said Holt was just careful, just precise. But soon, the board wanted a more formal review process. Grace no longer received monthly clinic reports. Donations were locked behind new cabinets. And still, she served. She stocked medicine. She read scripture aloud. She prayed for patients who cried harder than their diagnoses. The tension found its peak on a quiet Sunday afternoon, after service had ended and the congregation had gone. The sky outside held the warmth of spring, but the air behind the chapel was still. "Grace," Holt said gently, stepping out from the side door. His voice, ever composed, carried that soft authority that made people lean in. She turned. "You've always done so much for this church," he began, as though the sentence might end in a thank you. "But we've had some concerns." She waited, heart quiet. "There are missing meds, painkillers, antibiotics. Some of the donation forms were incomplete. And, this is hard to say, but there have been whispers. You know how it looks." Grace blinked once. She didn't respond. Holt stepped closer, eyes warm, words colder. "I'm not accusing you," he said, lowering his voice. "But if something's going on, we can keep it quiet. No need for a scene." She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just nodded slowly, then walked away, her shoes brushing the gravel. What Holt didn't know, what Grace had forgotten herself, was that her lapel mic from the fundraiser earlier was still pinned to her blouse, still connected to the sound booth, still live, and in that quiet chapel, empty but listening, every word he said echoed through the speakers and into the recording bank. The storm hadn't arrived yet, but the wind had shifted, and somewhere deep in Grace's bones, something old and tired finally began to stir. The news didn't spread with volume. It drifted through the congregation like perfume. No one said anything directly, but people started asking strange questions. "Do you know where the painkillers are kept? Did you ever work with inventory, Grace?" The audio had made its way into the boardroom, and by the time it reached the outer pews, it had changed shape. Some said she manipulated the recording. Others said Elder Holt had been framed. The truth wasn't what people were interested in. It was the version they could stomach without guilt. And so they talked in silence, in clipped greetings, in rearranged seating charts. On Wednesday evening, she arrived for the bake sale and no one met her eyes. The usual warmth was missing from the air, as though even the sugar in the brownies had curdled. Mrs. Klein, who once called Grace an angel, placed her tray of lemon bars on the opposite table and nodded without a smile. Dr. Linda Bryce gave her a sideways glance and then turned away mid-step, pretending not to see her. A hush followed Grace wherever she walked. She approached the donation counter only to find the list had been changed, her name replaced. No one said it aloud, but her presence made people uncomfortable now, as if she had brought shame with her hands. She stood still for a moment, watching as Holt spoke cheerfully with the deacons. He caught her eye, walked over, and smiled. "I heard about the misunderstanding," he said softly, folding his hands. Grace looked at him. "Misunderstanding?" He chuckled. "The recording. It's unfortunate how things get taken out of context." "You said those words." "I said a lot of things," he replied, tilting his head. "But let's not turn this into something it's not." She held his gaze, but her voice didn't rise. "You turned it into something it's not." Holt's expression didn't change. "Don't take it personally, Grace. Sometimes these things happen. Miscommunication, emotional responses. I know you've been under pressure. It can affect behavior. And what exactly are you accusing me of?" "Nothing," he said with practiced innocence. "We're just looking into everything transparently. Best for all involved." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Try not to worry too much. Focus on your work." That night, she drove past the church and parked outside the cemetery. The wind whistled gently through the trees, and the gravel crunched softly beneath her feet as she approached her mother's grave. She knelt without ceremony, her palms resting on the cold stone. "They're doing it again, Mama," she whispered. "The same way they did it to you." The silence didn't comfort her, but it didn't reject her either. She remembered the stories her mother told her late at night, hushed warnings about men who smiled while digging graves. Back then, Grace had been too young to understand what silence could cost a woman. Now, kneeling beside the one who taught her grace, she felt the ache of inherited pain, the lies, the smiling betrayals, the cost of being quiet too long. But this time, the whisper in her heart didn't say endure. It said rise. The following morning at the hospital, Grace noticed something odd. Her badge beeped red instead of green at the clinic door. She waited, then tried again. Still locked. When she asked the front desk, they told her she'd been reassigned. Temporarily, they said. Just a clerical thing. Nothing to worry about. But her patients had already been reassigned. Files moved, schedules cleared. She walked into the break room where two nurses fell silent mid-conversation. One sipped coffee as if nothing had happened. The other gathered her things quickly and left. It was a shift in the air, not the words, that confirmed it. Her name had made the rounds, and none of them wanted to be seen standing too close. Later that day, Linda finally spoke with her. "We have to let this process run its course," Linda said. Voice low, not unkind, just tired. "If you push back too hard right now, it could hurt your standing with the board." Grace looked at her. "So I should stay silent." "I'm saying, choose your battles." "And what happens when they choose me as theirs?" Linda sighed, not answering. That told Grace everything. The next few days were a fog. She wasn't fired, but she was no longer on any schedules. Her inbox was empty. Her voicemails went unanswered. The church board said they were reviewing conduct concerns and asked her not to attend meetings to avoid further discomfort. The more she stayed quiet, the more ground she lost. Her community thinned, her purpose dulled, her spirit flickered. But then, while cleaning her bookshelf, she came across a yellowed church newsletter from 1998. The ink had faded, but not enough to hide what it said. In light of recent concerns, Sister Lenora Mitchell will be stepping down from her volunteer role at the clinic. Her mother. She read it twice. Then again. Her mother hadn't stepped down. She had been removed. Quietly. Without voice. Without fight. History wasn't repeating itself. It had never stopped. Grace folded the newsletter and slipped it into her bag like a vow. Her breath slowed. Her back straightened. If her voice had been ignored, maybe it was time to let the truth speak in ways they couldn't unhear. Not for revenge. For her name. For her mother's name. For every woman they'd tried to silence with a smile. The church never said she was unwelcome. They just stopped opening the door. Grace showed up that Sunday like she always had. Same folded bulletin in her hand. Same pressed blouse her mother once wore. But her name was missing from the schedule. Her seat had been moved. Her clipboard gone. No one had the courage to look her in the eye. After service, Holt made a quiet announcement. To avoid further misunderstandings, we'll be adjusting volunteer rotations. He didn't mention her name. He didn't have to. The hospital followed suit, as if taking cues from the pulpit. The head nurse sent her a neutral email. In light of recent concerns and community feedback, we're placing you on administrative leave pending internal review. No hearing, no meeting, no explanation. She wasn't fired, but she wasn't welcomed either. For years, she'd spent her mornings comforting the dying and her afternoons stocking blood pressure cuffs and children's aspirin. Now, she wandered her apartment in soft silence, the clock ticking louder than usual. She checked her phone too often. Nothing came. Calls to friends weren't returned. Messages sat on read. Her world was shrinking, and she didn't know where to place her hands anymore. Dr. Linda Bryce finally called, but not to console. I need to document our conversation, she began. I'm not allowed to ask why I've been suspended. It's standard process now. Linda, Grace said softly, I thought you believed me. I believe the situation is complicated. Grace's voice cracked but never rose. You used to hug me after night shifts. Now you're reading me scripts. There's nothing I can do, Grace. My hands are tied. No, they're not. You're just afraid to use them. The call ended without goodbyes. Rumor moved faster than truth. It filled the gaps of silence with ugly guesses, whispers at the grocery store, half smiles that never reached the eyes. Even the pharmacy cashier who once offered her free tea bags now placed her receipt without a word. Everywhere she went, she carried a question mark she never asked for. She sat one evening on her mother's porch, the old swing creaking beneath her. She pulled the newsletter from her bag, the one with her mother's name printed small and cold. In light of recent concerns, there it was. Not truth, not transparency, just quiet removal, no fuss, no confrontation, just silence, and a woman's reputation left to rot in its wake. Grace leaned back and let the spring air press into her ribs. You already know, she whispered to herself, clutching the faded paper. They did it to her. Now they're doing it to me. But what they hadn't counted on, what Holt had never considered, was that Grace had kept something too, The original recording, the full, untouched audio file, every second, every word, every patronizing pause, was still backed up on her old church laptop. It had been hers to manage, and nobody had thought to change the password. Her fingers trembled, not with fear, but clarity. They wanted quiet. She would give them truth. The next morning, Grace woke with purpose. She brewed her coffee, not out of habit, but as armor. She opened her email and composed a short message addressed to the entire church board, sighing the hospital administration, and a local community columnist. Subject line, regarding the recent misunderstandings. Attached, the unedited audio file. She didn't add commentary, just one line. Please listen in full. Then she hit send. There was no instant reply. No sirens, no sudden shift in the wind. Just the ticking of the clock and the settling of breath in a room that had forgotten how it felt to matter. She turned off her phone and walked to her mother's grave again, but not to cry this time. She stood still, upright, her hands folded. The sun warmed her skin, and for the first time in days, she let her shoulders rise with breath. "Thank you," she said quietly. Not because things were fixed, but because something inside her was. Later that day, she received a single reply from Deacon Martin, who had served alongside Holt for 15 years. It read, "Grace, I listened, and I'm ashamed it took me this long." That night, Holt held an emergency meeting with the board. There was no vote, not yet, just damage control. He insisted the audio was edited, a smear, but the sound of his own voice made his denials weak. A few board members exchanged looks. One stood and walked out without a word. And the next morning, the community began to murmur differently. Not in whispers, but in questions. What exactly did he say to her? Why would she lie and send it to everyone? Didn't her mother go through something like this? The tide was changing. Not fast, but enough to wet the ground beneath Holt's feet. Grace didn't need applause. She didn't want revenge. She wanted the right people to finally hear what they'd refused to before. The quiet, cutting sound of truth. And now, they couldn't unhear it. Grace didn't hire a lawyer to make noise. She hired one to make it stop. Maya Daniels had once been her college roommate. Now, a civil rights attorney known for keeping her voice steady when others trembled. When Grace called, Maya didn't ask for a long explanation. She just said, "I'll be there Friday. Don't talk to anyone until I arrive." The legal part came later. First came the listening. Grace sat in her kitchen, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, while Maya filled a notepad in silence. "You're not looking for revenge," Maya finally said. Grace shook her head. "I want my name back. And that's exactly how we'll fight." The town didn't want to hear it. The audio had shaken them, sure, but no one wanted to be the first to take sides. Not when Holt still led Sunday prayer. Not when his wife still ran the food bank. Grace became a symbol no one wanted to carry. But symbols don't stop moving just because people look away. Maya filed a defamation claim with the hospital, sent legal notice to the church board. She requested logs of the donation inventory, emails between Holt and the deacons, and security footage of the supply room. "We're not accusing," Maya told them. "We're reviewing." And slowly, cracks began to show. A misplaced order form, a canceled shipment that was never refunded, a handwritten ledger with someone else's signature, then another. He called her a liar. She brought the ledger, and the evidence spoke with perfect clarity. One morning, as Maya prepared for another board meeting, she found Grace seated at the table reading through the bylaws of the church leadership code. "You ready for this?" Maya asked. "I've been ready," Grace said. "I just didn't know it until they pushed me out." They walked into the meeting together. The woman who once sat in the back pew now spoke in the front office, with documents in hand and calm in her chest. Maya presented every piece of evidence methodically, never raising her voice. She didn't have to. Grace's name was on every official volunteer report. Holt's name was on none. "I'd like to ask," Maya said, "how Elder Holt accessed medications when the lockbox code was changed 6 months ago and not shared beyond 2 people, Grace Mitchell and Deacon Wells." Deacon Wells swallowed hard. "I never gave him the code." A pause settled like thunder. Holt spoke at last. "This is a witch hunt." "No," Grace said softly. "This is a reckoning." The room fell still. Then Deacon Martin stood. "I move we've called for a full vote of leadership review." It didn't happen right away. The board delayed, requested outside mediation. But then something shifted, quietly, as these things do. One board member resigned, then 2 more. By the end of the week, a third sent an apology letter directly to Grace, handwritten, folded inside a church bulletin. "I believed him because it was easier than believing you," it read. "I'm sorry, I see now." Grace didn't reply. She didn't need to. The church bulletin sat on her mantel next to the faded newsletter from 1998. 2 women, 2 timelines. One truth finally rising. At the hospital, the administration had no choice but to respond. Maya's request for an internal review, backed by a growing petition from both patients and quiet allies, forced them to act. They issued a public statement. "We are reviewing the circumstances surrounding Grace Mitchell's administrative leave to ensure our processes reflect equity and fairness." Grace read the words twice, then folded the statement in half and placed it beneath her mother's obituary. On the following Sunday, Grace entered the church not as a volunteer, but as a guest speaker invited by the interim pastor. She didn't talk about what happened. She talked about silence, about how dangerous it can be when dignity is mistaken for weakness. She ended with a line that stayed in the air long after the pews emptied. "They didn't just question my character. They erased my mother's voice a second time." After service, the new deacon approached her. "If you'd be willing to serve again, the doors are open." Grace looked at him kindly. "I never stopped serving. I just changed rooms." She didn't return to the clinic, but she did help Maya draft a training program for church and hospital boards on recognizing implicit bias and institutional deflection. It was practical, quiet, and effective. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Grace sat across from Maya over coffee. "Do you think it's over?" she asked. "No," Maya said, "but it's begun." Grace smiled. "Then that's enough for now." Her phone buzzed. Another community asking her to speak. This time, it was a women's shelter in a neighboring county. She picked up, listened, and said yes. Because this was never about revenge. It was about dignity. It was about the right to stand in a room and not be spoken over. The woman who once handed out cough drops and prayer cards was now the voice behind new policies, a name mentioned in legal seminars, and a symbol of what happens when truth doesn't knock. It enters and stays. And while the town may have taken time to listen, the record now spoke for her, in full, without edits. And the world was still listening. The church bulletin that Sunday read only one sentence in bold at the top. "Open congregational meeting. All are welcome." There was no sermon, no choir, just pews filled with silence and tension. They said the people should decide. So the people came, some in Sunday best, others in quiet protest. Even those who had turned their backs on the church came to listen, maybe not for forgiveness, but for truth. Grace sat in the third row, not at the front, not hidden, just there. Elder Holt stood behind the pulpit like he had every Sunday for the past 5 years, his voice calm, his presence controlled. "I want to thank you all for coming," he began, smoothing the paper before him. "There's been a great deal of confusion, pain, and unfortunate assumptions. I've given my life to this community, and I believe in transparency." Someone near the front cleared their throat. Holt continued, "It's time we moved forward. But before that, I believe it's only fair we let you hear what's been going around." He gestured toward a laptop. A deacon clicked play. And then it began. The same mic that heard the lie now played it back to the world. His voice echoed through the sanctuary. "You know how it looks. We can keep it quiet. No need for a scene." The room froze. There was no coughing, no rustling of bulletins. Just that voice, confident, polished, unmistakable, and the weight of what he'd done pressing against the stained glass. Holt didn't interrupt. He didn't look up. And when it ended, the room stayed silent. Grace didn't shout. She didn't shake. She just stood. Her voice, when she spoke, didn't carry like his, but it didn't need to. You all heard what I heard. No edits, no tricks. Just what was said, exactly how it was said. And I want to be clear. This wasn't about proving I was right. It was about proving I wasn't wrong. She paused, breath steady. He didn't just doubt me. He discredited me. Quietly, strategically. And not just me, my mother, women like us, people who show up early and stay late and never make a scene. Still, no one moved. I stayed quiet because I didn't want to divide this community. But silence didn't protect me. It gave him room to work. And then, from the back row, a voice rose. I was wrong. Everyone turned. Deacon Martin stood, voice shaking. I sat in those meetings. I heard things I should have questioned. I looked away when I should have spoken up. And I believed him because it was easier than believing what was hard. He turned to Grace. "I am sorry for what we did, and for what we allowed." Another stood. Then another. It wasn't applause, it wasn't chaos, it was slow, it was still, and it was complete. Justice didn't roar, it settled. And Holt? He didn't yell, he didn't beg. He simply gathered his notes, nodded once to no one in particular, and walked out of the sanctuary. Not escorted, not screamed at, just gone. The door closed behind him, quieter than the mic that undid him. After the meeting, people didn't crowd Grace. They didn't lift her up or call her a hero. They simply approached with soft eyes and lowered voices. "I didn't know. I should have said something. My mother went through something like this." And Grace, patient as ever, listened. Not with pride, not with pain, but with clarity. The next day, a formal statement went out from the church board. Effective immediately. Elder Franklin Holt has been removed from all leadership roles due to confirmed misconduct and breach of ethical conduct standards. We extend our sincere apology to Grace Mitchell for the harm she endured and for the institution's failure to act sooner. The hospital followed. Grace was reinstated, not with ceremony, but with acknowledgement. A letter, a call from the new director, a handwritten note from the lead doctor. "We're rebuilding. If you're willing, we need your voice at the table." She accepted, but she didn't go back to her old job. Instead, she joined the policy board. 1 year later, the church launched a new initiative, the Lenora Mitchell Fund, for women in medical or ministry fields who had been silenced or sidelined without due process. The scholarship application opened with a single line. sometimes the mic isn't just for singing, it's for saving. Grace stood quietly beside the plaque at the launch ceremony. No cameras, no headlines. Just her community, and the sound of a space that had once pushed her out, now listening without interruption. Justice wasn't loud, but it was complete. The final meeting Grace ever attended at that church was a session on restorative practices. A young girl, just 15, raised her hand. How do you forgive someone who never said sorry? Grace paused before answering. You don't need their apology to let go of the wound. You need your truth to matter more than their silence. And in that quiet room, she smiled, because now it did. Grace never returned to the role they took from her. She didn't need to. Instead, she built something new, something that didn't require permission to exist. She called it the listening room. It wasn't flashy. It didn't promise justice in headlines or healing overnight. But it gave women, especially women of color, a place to speak, to be heard, and to be believed. The first time she opened the doors, only 4 people came. By the end of the year, she had 200 names on the wait list and 3 community chapters. She didn't preach. She trained. She listened. She sat in circles and let women speak their first truths after decades of silence. She hosted lawyers who taught them what questions to ask, therapists who taught them how to breathe again, advocates who showed them how to rebuild from ruins without ever lighting a match. The listening room wasn't built on anger. It was built on echoes of the things no one else wanted to hear. Inside the main hall, across from the registration desk, sat a small glass case. Visitors often passed by without knowing, but those who stopped saw it. A worn-out mic, the one from the chapel, frayed cord, bent clip, still intact. Beside it, a small plaque read, "He thought her silence was submission. He never realized it was strength gathering." People asked if she ever saw Holt again. She hadn't, but she heard he moved 2 towns over. Quiet now, no sermons, no stage. They thought she'd fade. She became the future. She joined panels on medical ethics. She advised state boards on faith-based discrimination. Her name appeared in textbooks and town halls, and whispered prayers from girls who saw her and thought, maybe me too. And every so often, someone would stop her at the store or send her a letter with shaking hands and folded regret. I judged you. I didn't speak up. I'm sorry. She never responded with anger. She didn't have to, because once upon a time they called her a liar behind the chapel, but the mic remembered. And now the world did too. One Sunday afternoon, years later, a young nurse approached her after a speaking engagement. "My supervisor says I ask too many questions," she said, nervously twisting her badge. "She says it makes people uncomfortable." Grace looked at her for a moment, then smiled. "Good," she said. "Let them be uncomfortable. That's how they learn to listen." The girl's eyes watered. "I didn't think people like you existed in real life." Grace placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I didn't either, until I had to become one." The crowd around them faded into quiet applause, but the girl's words lingered. That night, Grace wrote them down and pinned them to the inside of her desk drawer beneath the same newsletter that once tried to erase her mother. And then she sat back, closed her eyes, and finally let herself breathe, deep, full, and free. Because justice didn't just speak. It stayed. Have you ever been called a liar in a room that once clapped for your truth? When silence speaks louder than words, and a worn-out mic becomes your witness, what would you do? If Grace's journey moved you, stay with us. for more stories where voices rise and justice never whispers again.